You're listening to Sorry.
Today will be mostly sunny and pleasant, high of 80. Degree that.
You're listening.
당신은 지금 듣고 있습니다.
Вы слушаете.
Estás escuchando.
Una sikiliza
to GPSG Radio.
From the Indiana University.
El equipo de gobierno de los estudiantes graduados.
Graduate and Professional Student Government.
And welcome in to episode 4 of GPSG Radio, the podcast for Indiana University's graduate and professional student government. I'm Rick Brewer. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the only weekly podcast curated for IU Bloomington's graduate and professional student population. From our interviews with administrators, our Bloomington foodie reviews, the song of the week, the latest GPSG news, interviews with graduate students, I probably missed something, but all you need to know is that if you subscribe to this podcast, each Tuesday, you're going to get brand new content about all the latest happenings on the IU Bloomington campus, specifically for graduate students. So be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app, and maybe write us a little review on Apple Podcast if that's your preferred app. And of course, don't forget to say hi to GPSG on Facebook and Twitter. We're at the handle IUB GPSG, and of course, our weekly newsletter comes out every Tuesday, and it is published on our new Canvas site. And make sure that you stay up to date with all our weekly programming through the newsletter, or simply just subscribe to this podcast. Coming up in our show today, I took a trip down to the Musical Arts Center on Jordan Avenue, where I sat down for an interview with David Lefkowich, the director of the Jacob School of Music upcoming opera production, Don Giovanni.
If you don't see the operas here, you are missing out. Because anywhere you travel to, you can hopefully see something. You can find some opera within driving distance. But here, the stage and the facilities are at the same caliber of major opera companies all over the country. So that's really rare. But second, you're seeing this talent before they've become famous.
And you'll also hear from the Masters of Library Science student, Sylva Osbourne, during our Student Spotlight segment.
I think, one of my favorite things about Bloomington was the glass patch that they did in October. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's the Bloomington glass community here for the glass blowers. They're trying to build their own studio here in Bloomington, because right now they're using the one up in Indianapolis.
And of course, our Song of the Week, as we conclude almost every episode of GPSG Radio with a song from a local Bloomington artist or band. And this week, we hear from Spissy and one of their newest songs, Easy Mirror.
Easy mirror, someone near, going clear, it's not here, oh yeah.
But as always, and first, it's Shay with the news.
Thanks, Rick. And yes, I'm Shay with this week's news. Last week, as you know, we had our first GPSG General Assembly with all of our brand new GPSG representatives, and Diversity Council was all approved at the meeting. We went through kind of a general get to know your duties, learn who everyone is, and a meet and greet. And then after that, we had our first social hour at Serendipity, catered by Falafel, which was a great time. This week, we have more exciting stuff because this week is our first ever networking and dessert. It's Thursday, September 14th from noon to 1:30 p.m. at the Global and International Studies Building, room 1060. This is going to be a super cool event we're going to have planned by your Rick Brewer, and he's going to have really interesting people for you to come in and meet, alumni, other people from outside your department, where you can just kind of walk around, get to know people, say hello, and have some fantastic dessert. So I look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday. And also keep in mind, if you have one of the departments that did not get fully completed with your seats, we're having runoff elections this week. Assuming that 2 people or more were written in for your department, then that means we're going to have a runoff election between them to fill your department seats. So be looking for emails from your department secretaries if all of your seats are not filled. And if you still don't have filled seats, get back in touch with us if you're willing to be a nominee for your group. We want to make sure everyone's represented and we have all of our seats filled. That's all I've got with the news. Back to you, Rick.
David Lefkowich is the director of the Jacob School of Music upcoming opera production, Don Giovanni, with shows playing both this coming weekend and the weekend of September 22nd. And in this interview, you'll learn about the world-class talent in the Jacobs Opera program and get a preview of what's to come in Don Giovanni from Lefkowich himself. And now I give you David Lefkowich. Let's learn a little bit more about you and your affiliation with IU. So tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, this is my first time working at IU, and I'm so pleased to be here because this is one of the top 10 music schools in the world, let alone the country. I've never worked here, like I said, and I was so pleased about a year ago when they asked me to come in and direct one of their main stages. And I try to balance my professional career with as many academic shows as I possibly can. But this one is very special because the students here are not just students. They're really pre-professionals that are making their way into the world, and you could see any of them on the stage of the Met within a decade, easily.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about this sort of music energy that's at Jacobs and in the opera program. I mean, you obviously contract around the entire country, but what is it about Jacobs that stands out to you?
Well, the Jacobs School, I think what's first and foremost is that if they do a production of Don Giovanni or any of the fine main stages this year, they're able to put 2 full casts in. And that's rare. Most universities, if they're going to tackle a really difficult opera like Don Giovanni, they might have 1 cast maybe to be able to sing the difficult roles. But here they have 2 casts, and both casts, there isn't like a first cast and a second cast. All the casts are equal and equally talented. So for me, it's been really fun because I work with one group and then they sit down, another group stands up, and it doesn't have to look the same, it doesn't sound the same, it doesn't feel the same, and yet we're working on the same show. So I think I arrived here about 2.5 weeks ago, and it's been a roller coaster, but only the fun parts, not the bad parts of roller coasters when it gets scary. It's just been great, and I feel very lucky. Both casts are so friendly. They're as talented as they are friendly. So they come in, they're ready to work, they're prepared beautifully. I mean, they are coached, they know the role. When I ask them, well, what are you singing about here? Or what are you saying? Most of the time, they instantly have a response, and it just makes for a really terrific working environment. You don't find this at every school.
We have a lot of people here at IU who might not be taking advantage of this amazing music school, right? And maybe some people might think of opera, they might have this like preconceived notion. What is your sort of pitch to people who might be on the fence with going to an opera or maybe being in an environment that they're not really familiar with?
Well, I think opera in general can be scary, especially to a 21st century audience. It's long, it's all sung, and it's all this music that isn't necessarily contemporary, doesn't speak to today's generation. But if you don't see the operas here, you are missing out. Because anywhere you travel to, you can hopefully see something. You can find some opera within driving distance. But here, the stage and the facilities are at the same caliber of major opera companies all over the country. So that's really rare. But second, you're seeing this talent before they've become famous. So, you could see any of these guys on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera, but you're going to spend $200 for a ticket. Here, I don't know how much the tickets are, but it's like $12 or $20. So you're seeing world-class singing in terrific facilities with these great productions with professional caliber directors who are coming in, and it's all for very little money. So if you are on the fence about opera, go see one. And if you hate it, leave at intermission. But don't miss out, because I don't know if people realize that in their backyard, there's something of this quality level here. And to the point where the whole world knows about the Jacob School of Music. This isn't just, local or Indiana specific or even American specific. Like it's notorious all over the world. And so I think I would love, if I didn't even realize that until I arrived here, but if I lived here, I would see everything merely just to say, wow, I got to try it out. It wasn't too much of a commitment. I had a lot of fun, and I even enjoyed myself.
Without giving any spoilers away, could you maybe give us a summary or sort of a preview for Don Giovanni?
So Don Giovanni basically centers around this character, Don Juan or Don Giovanni, and his sort of voracious appetite for life and for women. And it actually pushes beyond what we would consider social graces and normalcy, and he actually does attack and molest some women in his quest to sort of devour every female in his path. So it really centers around him, but it also centers around these other 6 characters that their lives are impacted because of Giovanni. There are 3 women and 3 men, and they all have to grapple with this character in their lives who disrupts their normalcy and turns their lives into something that could be a real disaster. But what I love about it's a morality play. So we see all of the bad things right in the beginning. That's sort of, we don't even hold back in this production. You see everything right from the top. And then you watch the characters grapple with it. And I think at least what Mozart and the librettist Da Ponte were saying were that if you lead a life of sin, if you lead a life of without any consequences, it's going to end very poorly for you. And not to give away the ending, but it's definitely a drama giocosa. There's a comedic aspect and a dramatic aspect, and the show definitely ends with a slightly more dramatic aspect. Right in the beginning of the opera, I don't think this is giving too much away, Giovanni takes the life of the father of one of the ladies in the show. And I think like most ghosts would like, he gets to enact his revenge on Giovanni at the end. So we really see both the action and then the consequence spelled out. But it also is all wrapped up in this beautiful music. I think Mozart is one of the most incredible composers that we're lucky enough to be able to interpret these days. And with this show, the music it's one of Mozart's last operas. And it is, you can feel, he wasn't very old when he died, but you can feel the experience and the wisdom. And all of the operas that come before, you sort of get a best of. It's all the best parts about Mozart's compositions all wrapped up in this theatrical package. It's as theatrical as it is musical. There are moments where the music is the virtuosity, and that's the focus. But then there's also this great story that's happening at the same time that's truly entertaining. The cliche of the larger opera singer with horns does not apply here. This is much more story-based, and for people who are looking for, something interesting and something scintillating, this is an opera that has that.
David, thank you so much for coming on GPSG Radio, and we hope to see a bunch of people out here at the Don Giovanni this coming weekend.
Thanks so much for having me.
David Lefkowich, the director of Don Giovanni. Curtain call for Don Giovanni is 7:30 at the Musical Arts Center, where you can also purchase your tickets at the box office or at the Max online box office. Student tickets start at just $10. Still to come in this episode of GPSG Radio, our Song of the Week from Spissy. But coming up is our Student Spotlight segment. As each week, GPSG Radio interviews graduate and professional students from all across the IU campus to learn about all the different research endeavors that students are taking, as well as to learn a little bit more about this great city of Bloomington. So please enjoy this week's guest, Sylva Osbourne. Welcome in to another Student Spotlight here on GPSG Radio, and today I'm joined by Miss Sylva Osbourne, who is a Master's in Library Science here at IU Bloomington and is specializing in archives and records management, who is originally from the greater Orlando area. So Sylva, what attracted you to library science?
Well, I worked in my university library and during my undergrad for most of the time that I was there. And then I took a year off after I graduated because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I'd studied music and Italian while I was there, but didn't really want to go into teaching. And I didn't sort of specify in performance at all because I was more on the history side. So I took a year off, and then I decided to go back home. I stayed with my parents for a while, trying to figure out what to do in Florida, which there's not a whole lot in the sort of central area, because if you're right near Orlando, and I'm about 45 minutes out, you could work at the theme parks. But you're starting mostly minimum wage, and I didn't really want to do that, and in the hot sun, and I'd done that for a summer at SeaWorld. It's not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I sort of just started thinking about what I've done before and landed in libraries. So I went back to Chicago, where I did my undergrad for another year, and ended up in a temporary job at a law firm in their law library. And I started doing research into what it would take to become a librarian, because, I've done it before, and I thought, well, this could be something that I actually kind of enjoy doing. And then that's when I found out you needed the MLS and sort of just decided this might be for me.
I feel like there might be some misconceptions about library science because there's the word science thrown in there. So could you maybe explain to us what exactly library science is?
Sure. To me, I think library science is the study of how libraries work. And this is all libraries and all sort of repositories that hold information. And so library science is basically studying how these libraries operate and how they get gather information through books and cataloging and preservation, and also electronic resources now, because those are becoming increasingly popular. And they gather all of that information and they find a way to make it as accessible to as many people as possible.
Now, you're specializing in archives and records management. I feel like most people aren't familiar with archives because most people might think, oh, architect, or they might think something a little bit different, or like an archaeologist, but it's a librarian position, but it's a little different. So could you talk about that?
Okay. Well, my first experience with archives is actually my current internship at the University Archives. So I didn't know a whole lot of what it was until I took Phil Banton's archive class my first semester here. But having actually worked in an archive now, I think archivists are people who, they look after very specific items. It's not as much books as people tend to associate with libraries. It's more papers and manuscripts and very specific, like, sort of things like that you wouldn't think of as you would think of more associated with a museum than a library. But yeah, I think so. The archivist is, to me, a bit of an in-between between libraries and museums, almost.
Now, what attracted you to IU specifically?
In all honesty, the financial aid package. I think the reason I applied to the school to begin with was they were one of the few out of all the ALA accredited schools that they don't specifically focus on the information science part of things, which is what a lot of schools are starting to tend towards because that's becoming more and more popular. They still have that split between the library side and the information science side. So you can get both, or you can get one. And I wanted to go towards the library side. Plus, they were one of the few schools that did have the archives specialization. And when I first started, that was where I was leaning towards. So
when you're not studying or working in the university archives, as you mentioned, what can I find you doing?
Mostly hanging out with friends, or we like to play a lot of games like Cards Against Humanity, of course, or dominoes, actually, or love letters, things like that. Or when I'm on my own, I'm usually just at home watching TV. I like to do a lot of jigsaw puzzles, just because watching TV, I can't always stay focused, and so I am doing jigsaw puzzles at the same time to kind of give me something for my hands to do, or like Sudoku puzzles, just something to keep my brain going. Or I actually do a lot of crafts. Mosaic crafts with the little glass tiles and stuff. I just made a couple of coasters about a month ago, and I'm actually starting to work on a new project, a mirror, and a couple other smaller things. So yeah, that's what I do in my free time.
You thought about maybe going to one of the Bloomington craft shows and maybe selling some of your stuff, or?
Well, I only just started, probably in December is when I did my first project, so I don't have a whole lot of stuff. All the stuff that I've made is sort of for my own personal use at home, but I'm leaning towards maybe making more things, and eventually when I have like a good selection of things, I might try selling them somewhere or on Etsy or something. Who knows?
Excellent. Now, what do you think your number one thing to do in Bloomington is, whether it might be a restaurant, a bar, music scene, anything like that?
Well, when I'm not at home, being lazy. My friends and I like to go to Red Robin of all places, usually for burgers, and they have this really great Irish beer milkshake, which has got Baileys and whiskey in it, and of course ice cream. So it's like the best of both worlds. So I guess that's probably my favorite thing, or just going to the movies.
What do you think is the best part about living in Bloomington?
Bloomington is kind of unique. I've never been in a college town really before, because like Chicago isn't really, I mean, the area where the school is, sure, but the whole city itself is bigger than just that school. And there are, of course, multiple schools. So I've never lived in a college town before, which makes it very unique. And it's like it's a really small town. It's smaller than the one that I grew up in. Definitely smaller than Chicago, of course. So I guess unique is the only word that I can think of to describe it. But it's really nice being here.
Unique in what way?
Well, there's a wide variety of people, I think. I feel like, and there are a lot of people. And I didn't realize how big the school was until recently when they started the new student orientation. And they have to start 3 months before school starts because of how many incoming freshmen they have. Chicago is not nearly that big. So it's a bit jarring for me to realize that there are actually that many undergrads around. But I think like one of my favorite things about Bloomington was the glass patch that they did in October. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's the Bloomington glass community here for the glass blowers. They're trying to build their own studio here in Bloomington because right now they're using the one up in Indianapolis. And they start in the year. They don't, from what I read on their website, they don't usually blow the pumpkins during the summer months because it's way too hot. But starting from like, I think right after the previous patch ends in October up until the summer months, they go and they just make all of these glass pumpkins of all different sizes, different colors. And last year they had, I think, about 900 of them, and they put them all out on the lawn in front of the courthouse. So it's like an actual, like a pumpkin patch, but it's made out of glass pumpkins. And I think they also had a few other, it's mostly pumpkins, but they had a few other vegetables like zucchini, a squash, some corn, all made out of glass. And it's really cool. And you go and you can actually buy them, and all of the proceeds go to helping them make new ones and raise money to build their own studio here. And with my own interest in glass art with my mosaics, and eventually I might like to pick up stained glass art as well, it was really fascinating for me to see the glass blowing side of things. And they actually you can volunteer with them and go help and learn how to make pumpkins and things like that at the studio. You just have to go up with them to Indianapolis. So I think that's the most unique thing I have ever seen before anywhere, and that's probably my favorite thing about Bloomington.
Well, Sylva, thank you so much for coming on the program. We hope to see you at some GPSG events this year. Sylva Osbourne, a master's student of library science. And if you know of somebody who might be interested in being featured in our Student Spotlight segment, please email me. My email address is gpsgcdc@indiana.edu. And if anyone has any upcoming news all across the University Graduate School, all departments, maybe your student organization has an upcoming event, please let me know. I'd love to get you on the program to talk about and advertise that event a little bit. All advertising is free, so please let me know. I'm open to everyone and anything. Well, that about wraps up this episode of GPSG Radio, and we conclude with a song from Spissy, a local indie rock band, who can most frequently be heard at the Bishop Bar on Walnut. You can find Spissy on Bandcamp, Spotify, and at the Facebook handle @Spissy. That's SPISSY. GPSG is on Facebook and Twitter at the handle IUBGPSG, and be sure to subscribe to both this podcast and our weekly newsletter. They come out every Tuesday. GPSG Radio is produced and hosted by me, Rick Brewer, with contributions from Shay Smock and the Level Up Studios at the Monroe County Public Library. And now I give you Easy Mirror by Spissy.
left and right till it's out of sight. Oh no, the questions frame, but they're all the same. Oh no, hard on yourself till there's nothing left. Kick the habit of getting off your chest. Something deep inside, do you feel alright? Rattle up the loose, draping round tonight. Oh yeah. Easy me or someone near, going clear, it's not here, oh yeah. Forever by my side, finding some new play. Run around the things that were hard to say. Felt a little soul with your open knee. Shuffled up the cards so carefully, oh yeah. I'm tired of time living in my brain. Anxious minds find it hard to say. Traces of the blast till there's nothing left. Cooking up my brain, it's so hard to guess. Easy mirror in a different way. Nothing gold's ever here to stay. What to do when you're feeling fine? Keep the water rising off your mind. Oh yeah.
GPSG Radio.